Hey guys, welcome to Twisted Talks. I'm Josh.
I'm Tanya.
And this week is the continuation from last week's episode. So this is Jeffrey Dahmer Part 2. Last week we covered, I suppose, all the murders and so
all
on.
The twisted
Yeah.
All the twisted
And then this week is more so kind of capture, confession, trial, that kind of thing. So probably won't be quite as long as last week's, but you never know with us. And with that said, I will hand the reins over to Tanya as she brings us into the...
capture.
There we go.
The capture. So, on July 22nd, 1991, Dahmer went to a bar where he approached three men and offered them $100 to go back to his apartment to pose nude for photographs, drink beers, and keep him company. Of the three men, only 32-year-old Tracy Edwards agreed to go with him. When they entered the apartment, Tracy noticed a foul smell, and several boxes of hydrochloric acid on the floor, to which...
Delightful.
Yeah, to which Dahmer said he used the hydrochloric acid to clean bricks.
Who cleans bricks and why?
Exactly. So they made some small talk and Dahmer asked Tracy to look at his tropical fish, which were supposedly dead, as he told his neighbour, to explain the smell away.
Yeah.
And as soon as Tracy turned his head, Dahmer placed a handcuff on his wrist. Tracy asked what's happening, as Dahmer unsuccessfully tried to cuff his other wrist, and then told Tracy to accompany him to the bedroom to pose for the photos. Once they were inside the bedroom, Tracy...
So he was Tracy's hands were cuffed together, but not cuffed to anything?
No, only one of his hands was cuffed. So
the other one was probably to cuff him to the bed or something.
No, so when he turned his head to look at the fish,
yeah,
Dahmer cuffed whichever hand was closer to him. And then as Tracy turned back and asked what was happening, Dahmer tried to cuff his hands together, but he failed.
Okay, so at this point one hand is only cuffed.
He had one handcuff. That was probably Justin coming in the door.
Oh, okay.
Sorry about that.
It came through so much louder on this. I was like, what?
So when they got to the bedroom, Tracy took note of some nude male posters on the wall. There was a 57-gallon drum in the corner of the bedroom, and it absolutely stank.
This is where he was dissolving. And
yeah. Why would you keep it in your bedroom?
I mean, if he's turned on by it all. Yeah, that's my thoughts exactly.
Yeah. Anyway, he also noticed that The Exorcist 3 was playing on the TV. As you do.
Yeah.
Dahmer brandished a knife, big knife. I'm assuming that it was the knife he used to skin and dissect his victims.
Delightful. And
while brandishing the knife, told Tracy he was going to take nude pictures of him. Tracy, in an attempt to appease him, unbuttoned his shirt and told him he could take the pictures if he would take the cuffs off and put the knife away.
Understandable request.
Yeah, I don't think he's asking too much. Dahmer simply turned to watch the TV, and at this point, Tracy observed him rocking back and forth and chanting before he turned his focus back to Tracy, leaned his head against his chest, and while listening to Tracy's heartbeat, pressed his knife against him and told him that he was going to eat his heart. Tracy continuously attempted to prevent Dahmer from attacking him. He kept saying that he was Dahmer's friend and he wasn't going to run away. He had decided that he was either going to jump from a window or run through the unlocked front door at the next opportunity.
Yeah.
So Tracy asked if he could use the bathroom and if they could sit in the living room with a beer afterwards because there was air conditioning in there. Dahmer agreed, and they both.
Which was the right way to go, because
he was,
as we get into in a while, a lot of it seems to be kind of to do with not wanting them to leave.
It's the fear of abandonment. Yeah. Tracy was very smart about all this. So, sorry now. Where was I? Yeah, so he kept saying that he was Dahmer's friend. He wasn't going to run away. He decided he was going to jump out the window or go through the front door. So he asked if he could use the bathroom. Could they sit in the living room with a beer because there was air conditioning in there? Dahmer agreed, and they both went to the living room after Tracy came out of the bathroom. Once they were in the living room, Tracy waited until he noticed Dahmer have a momentary lapse in concentration before asking to use the bathroom again. Now, as he stood up from the couch, he noticed that Dahmer wasn't holding the handcuffs. So Tracy punched him in the face, knocking him off balance.
Because one handcuff was still on Tracy.
And ran out the front door. Like, absolutely legged it.
Yeah.
As you would.
Well, yeah, especially not only does this dude have a handcuff on me and also has a knife, he's actually told me he wants to eat my heart.
Yeah, and he's being sketchy at best.
And there's a big gallon in the bedroom.
There's a 57-gallon drum in his bedroom
that is not for bricks.
Yeah, it's not for bricks.
It's for dicks.
It's for dicks. That's horrible. So at 11:30 p.m, Tracy flagged down 2 Milwaukee police officers. These were Robert Roth is what I would go with. And Rolf Mueller. Rolf Mueller?
Okay.
Mueller. I'm going to say
like Mueller Corners.
Like the Mueller yogurts,
okay.
Yeah. The officers noticed the handcuff that was attached to his wrist, and he stated that a freak had put them on him, asking the officers if they could remove them. Now, the officer's keys didn't fit the brand of handcuff that was on him, so Tracy agreed to accompany them to Dahmer's apartment so that they could get the keys.
Yeah.
Now, he also told police that he'd been stuck in the apartment for 5 hours before escaping.
So that was actually how long this whole back and forth was going, and going to the bathroom and saying I'm not leaving.
So he really bided his time.
He really done good.
Yeah. So when the officers and Tracy arrived at the apartment, Dahmer invited them in, and he acknowledged that he had handcuffed Tracy. When Tracy also told the police officers that he had threatened him with a knife, Dahmer made no comment on this, but he told the police officers that the handcuff keys were in his bedside drawer. Now, as Officer Mueller entered the bedroom, Dahmer actually tried to get past him to get the key himself.
Yeah.
To which Officer Routh told him to back off.
Yeah.
So inside the bedroom, Mueller found the large knife on the bed, and in an open drawer he found several Polaroid pictures of human bodies in various stages of dismemberment.
Okay, there we go.
He cut himself out, like.
There's the shooting gun.
Yeah.
Or is it smoking gun?
Smoking gun. Mueller noticed that the decor in the pictures was the same as that of the apartment, so he knew that these pictures had been taken at that apartment.
Yeah.
Mueller went back to the living room to show his partner, saying, "These are for real." And then when Dahmer realised that Mueller had found his Polaroid collection, he attempted to fight the officers off and resist arrest.
Okay.
But he was quickly overpowered. They cuffed his hands behind his back and called a second squad car for backup. At this point,
how the tables have turned.
Oh, how the turns have tabled. At this point, Officer Mueller opened the fridge.
Oh, God.
And
close
discovered
it. Go away. Get
the
out.
freshly severed head of a male at the bottom of the shelf. Dahmer, who was pinned to the floor beneath Officer Routh at this point, turned his head towards the officers and said, quote, "For what I did, I should be dead."
Who said that?
Dahmer.
Okay.
Himself said it.
Yeah.
Now, a further search was carried out in the apartment by investigators.
Yeah.
This turned up 4 severed heads in his kitchen.
Cute.
7 skulls. Some were painted, others were bleached. These were found in his bedroom. Blood drippings lay on a tray at the bottom of the fridge, and wrapped up in plastic bags on the fridge shelves were 2 human hearts and a portion of arm muscle. His freezer contained an entire human torso, and there was a bag of human organs and flesh stuck to the ice at the bottom of the freezer.
That is fucking disgusting.
Yeah. Elsewhere in the apartment,
like, obviously everything before it was also disgusting, but that was the icing on the cake for me.
Elsewhere in the apartment, investigators discovered 2 complete skeletons.
Okay.
A pair of severed hands.
Ew. But that just reminds me of llamas with hats. What? Have you not seen that?
Happy llama, sad llama. No.
I'll show you afterwards.
Okay.
But anyone else who hasn't seen it, just look up llamas with hats on YouTube. It's not actual llamas with hats, it's an animation, cartoony thing.
Are you traumatising our listeners with visual aids?
Oh no, it's comedy sketch.
Okay.
Sort of.
This is the part where I had to just sit there for a second and reconsider everything. 2 severed and preserved penises were found in his apartment. 2 severed and preserved penises, just in case you didn't hear me the first time.
I feel unsafe in between my legs.
Literally, I said this to you. I said, when I read this part, you're going to wince.
There's tears in my eyes. Yeah, but you know what? Like, just, I don't know, they might not have had them back then, but this is taking the whole mould a dick thing to a very sadistic and extreme level.
He didn't want to mould a dick. He
wanted
the
the
whole
dick.
penis preserved. For whatever reason. I don't even want to think about it. Anyway.
I'm never going to be able to look at real feel dildos ever again without thinking of this. And I'm not even like saying that to like be like crude or anything, if that's even the word, but like that's a fact. Every time I see something with that description now, this is what I'm going to think.
You're going to think of Jeffrey Dahmer. Investigators also found a mummified scalp, and when they looked inside the 57-gallon drum that was in his bedroom, they found 3 more dismembered torsos.
That were just dissolving, I suppose.
Yeah, they were in an acid solution, and there was a total of 74 Polaroid pictures detailing Dahmer's dismemberment process. The chief medical examiner later said, quote, "It was more like dismantling someone's museum than an actual crime scene."
Yeah.
So
everything was on show almost.
Yeah, so that's a rundown of what was found in his apartment after he was caught.
Okay, so now on to the confession.
Yes.
So,
what was that noise?
I'm practicing being a hamster.
Okay, stop now.
Yeah, I triggered.
Yeah. I'm going to kick you in the face. With love.
With love. Okay, sicko. So, in the early hours of the 23rd of July 1991, questioning began. Dahmer was questioned by Detective Patrick Kennedy about the murders he had committed and about the evidence that was found at his apartment. Over the 2 weeks that followed, Detective Kennedy, and later Detective Dennis Murphy, did numerous interviews with Dahmer. The interviews, when combined, came to over 60 hours.
Jesus Christ.
But then again, 17 victims.
Yeah.
And backstory and whatnot. Anywho, Jeffrey Dahmer waived his right to have a lawyer present during the interrogations and said he wanted to confess everything as he had, quote, created this horror and it only makes sense I do everything to put an end to it, unquote.
Oh, you're so good. You're so good, Jeffrey.
Yeah, but do you know what I find is very different in this one? He is, obviously everything he did is horrible and I'm in no way excusing it by what I'm about to say.
Yeah.
But to some extent, he's very cooperative compared to a lot of people who do these kind of things, and he's very almost empathetic even though he did these horrible things. It's like he's...
You did say he has BPD, didn't you?
Multiple things. There's schizotypal, BPD, everything like that. So I think it's kind of like down to all the impulsiveness of all his different disorders, and he does feel maybe remorse afterwards.
One thing I will say from my own experience with BPD is you have such a profound sense of empathy, or at least I do.
Same.
So maybe that's what he was kind of tapping into there.
Two BPD bitches here.
Yeah. We might as well have just called the podcast BPD, to be honest.
But
oh my god, if we ever start a Patreon.
What else was I going to say, actually, to do with that?
Sorry, I totally threw you off there.
Like, as well, it's like, and like, I know, like, people could say, oh, well, obviously you're going to say that when you're caught, but, like, he doesn't have to admit to everything he's admitted to. They haven't found evidence for everything in his house.
There are serial killers who hold back.
He owned up to every single case, like even ones they didn't know about or hadn't discovered any evidence of. So like it's like he wasn't trying to, like, he waived his right for an attorney, everything like that. Whereas anyone who wants to try and get away with it, or try somewhat, or doesn't feel somewhat remorseful or something, why would they be waiving all their rights to try and swindle everyone?
Yeah.
But anyway, that's very debatable.
Yeah.
So Dahmer admitted to having murdered 16 young men in Wisconsin since 1987, and admitted to one further victim, Stephen Hicks, who he had killed in Ohio in 1978. The majority of Dahmer's victims had been made unconscious before their murder, but some had died as the result of having either acid or boiling water injected into their brain.
Oh.
Yeah, I couldn't get over that one when I read it.
That's
like, it's all horrible, but that was
beyond
just something
twisted,
else.
like beyond twisted.
Dahmer said he had no memory of the murder of Stephen Tuomi, his second victim, and that he was unsure whether Stephen was unconscious when beaten to death. However, he did admit it was possible that viewing the exposed chest of Stephen while in a drunken state may have led him to unsuccessfully attempt to rip out Stephen's heart from his chest.
As you do.
Nearly all of the murders Dahmer committed after moving into the Oxford apartments had involved a ritual of posing the victims' bodies in suggestive positions, usually with the chest thrust outwards, and then that would have been prior to dismembering them. Dahmer also admitted to engaging in necrophilia with several of his victims' bodies, including performing sexual acts with their internal organs.
Excuse me?
Yeah.
Excuse me?
As he dismembered their bodies in the bathtub. So...
That is disgusting.
I'm like, I don't know what way he means that, but I'm assuming that's like fleshlight vibes.
I don't want to speculate on that. Thank you very much.
And obviously, for those of you that don't know what a fleshlight is, I'm not saying it because of what he's using. That's the actual term for a product for sexy playtime with oneself. Or with company, I guess, depends what you're into. Sharing is caring. But anywho, I was just about to say unless it's an STI, but I was like... So Dahmer had noted that a lot of the blood gathered or pooled inside his victim's chest after death. So first he would remove their internal organs, hang up the torso, so that the blood would drain into the bathtub, before dicing any organs he did not want to keep and skinning the skin from the body. Any bones he wanted to get rid of, he would pulverise or acidify or dissolve. He would then use Silex or bleach solutions to help in the preservation of skeletal remains and skulls he wanted to keep. Dahmer further confessed to having consumed the hearts, livers, biceps and portions of thighs of multiple victims that he had killed within the previous year. Yeah. He often tenderised the flesh and organs prior to eating them in meals flavoured with various condiments, because apparently, no matter what you're eating, it's all about tenderising.
I'm so glad I'm a vegetarian.
I was just about to say, the more I read of this case and the more research I did, that the more I was glad I was vegan. Otherwise, I'd actually be gawking at every mention of tenderising and stuff like that. Because I can't relate to eating anything flesh related, whether it's animal or not. Well, it definitely can't relate to if it's or not.
Let's just...
Leave that there.
Let's just move on.
And of course, we can't forget the condiments.
Of course. Only savages eat without condiments.
He's literally having kidney con ketchup. Sorry. Anywho.
Chili con kidney. Sorry.
Why is it called chili con carne? Oh, because in English that translates to chili with meat.
Yeah.
That's the one. Yeah. So in a description of the increasing rate of his killing in the 2 months before his arrest, Dahmer said he had been, quote-unquote, completely swept along with his compulsion to kill, and also added, quote-unquote, it was an incessant and never-ending desire to be with someone at whatever the cost, someone good-looking, really nice-looking. It just filled my thoughts all day long. When he was asked...
would you not just get a boyfriend, Jeff?
But I'm saying, but he was scared they'd leave.
Oh, right.
Should we warn Justin?
Nah, he's fine. But like...
Coming soon. A new episode on a true crime.
I like that you think I'm going to murder my boyfriend. Why? Give me one good reason as to why you think I'm going to murder my boyfriend.
We'll leave that for off air. No, I'm only joking.
Okay,
I don't mean
guys,
it.
I do love my boyfriend. I have no intentions of killing him. Justin, if you hear this, I'm sorry.
Just saying. In loads of cases, it's always the partner, and it's a crime of passion and in the moment.
Okay. Well, it's a good thing I have excellent control over my temper then. You're not making me sound good here.
I'm making myself feel better, okay?
Okay.
No, I'm
Listen,
joking.
realistically,
If you kill someone, I'd probably be helping you get rid of the body.
No, if either of us was to become a murderer, it's you.
Why me?
You've got that look about you.
It's the smolder.
Give it the smolder.
Oh, actually, but remember I was saying to you earlier, I was like that, I can't get over how back then, like, because Jeffrey Dahmer, to be fair, I think was decent looking in his time. Not the best. Not the best, but not the worst.
Wouldn't be my type.
It depends on the photo, because I feel like some of the photos he looks attractive in, other photos he looks horrible.
Right.
But I was just saying to Tanya earlier, I was like, that it just kind of goes to show how easily these things can happen. Because if I met someone that looked like him in a bar, and they wanted to go somewhere to fondoodle,
to play with your fiddle stick,
not those bones. I would go, and in this case I would be dead.
He would be gone.
Well, actually, I like to think I'd be smart enough to get out of there, like the Tracy guy, but who knows? Especially after some tequila.
He is not attractive at all. Look at him. He looks like a wet paper towel.
No, not they are. Jesus Christ.
Go on then.
More like they are. I think it's the daddy issues.
Probably, but like, the thing is, that specific picture, he looks like someone from town's boyfriend. A little bit. I'll show you the boyfriend after this.
Interesting.
Actually, I'm going to show you the boyfriend now. Sorry guys, bit of a distraction.
Bit of a tangent, but I guess it was still Jeffrey related, so it's still on topic.
But like, I don't know. Something about him in that picture just reminds me of him. You see it?
Yeah.
He's a much nicer person than Jeffrey Dahmer, though.
I would fucking hope so. Because to be honest, even saying that is setting the bar very low, Tanya.
Yeah, which is why I didn't say names.
So, okay, yeah, we've had why he was asked in the increased rate and whatever. So, when he was then asked why he had preserved a total of 7 skulls, an entire skeleton, entire skeletons of 2 of his victims, Dahmer said he had been in the process of making a private altar of victims' skulls, which he had intended to display on the black table located in his living room, and upon which he had photographed the bodies of many of his victims. Now, the display of skulls were to be put at each side with the complete skeletons of Ernest Marquez Miller and Oliver Joseph Lacey. The 4 severed heads found in the kitchen were to have all the flesh removed and to be used in this altar, as was the skull of at least one future victim. And just for a bit of feng shui, incense sticks were to be placed at each end of the black table.
Sorry. Was he intending on, bringing people into his home to see this altar?
But, I suppose, as long as they were cleaned properly and there was no smell, you'd assume they were decorations. That it's a weird altar to have, but that it's not an actual person's thing.
I suppose, yeah.
And then also, of course, it's all about lighting. Above this, Dahmer had planned to place a large blue lamp with extending blue globe lights.
No. I shouldn't be laughing.
If he wasn't a serial killer, maybe he could have been an interior designer in another life. Do you know? I'm watching the waves of how the audio's coming through, and I'm finally quite happy that your laughs are coming through just as loud as mine, so I can't be solely held responsible for the deafening of yours. But
Sorry, we've been recording for way too long. I'm starting to get
it's nearly coming up to your next part, but I have a tiny bit to go.
5% and my laptop is dead, so...
Oh fuck. Hang on. we'll whip it out in a second. Did you want
Whip what
to...
out? What are you whipping out?
No comment.
Charger.
But anywho, so the lighting, important. So the entire construction was to be placed in front of a window covered with a black opaque shower curtain, in front of which Dahmer intended to sit in a black leather chair, just admiring his
Gorgeous.
his work, I suppose.
Fantastic.
Then in an interview on November 18th, 1991, when Dahmer was asked who the altar was dedicated to, Dahmer replied, quote, "Myself. It was a place where I could feel at home." Dahmer further described the intended altar as a place for meditation, from where he believed he could draw a sense of power. He added that if his arrest hadn't happened, 6 months later, that is what they would have found. He had a time frame and everything. Excuse the zipping noises and stuff.
I'm just going to make an altar out of my victims' bodies.
And meditate.
And meditate there, because it's dedicated to me.
Myself.
I'm
and
cool. Me. Woo. It's just
Pick
me, myself.
Choose me.
Love me.
Sorry about the noises of the wire grating on the microphone.
Look at that.
So yeah, Tanya, over to you.
Okay, so getting into the indictments. So on July 25th, 1991, Jeffrey Dahmer was charged with 4 counts of first-degree murder. By August 22nd, he was charged with 11 more counts for murders committed in Wisconsin. On September 14th, investigators uncovered hundreds of bone fragments in the woods behind the address Dahmer had been living at when he murdered Stephen Hicks. They were able to make a formal identification based on x-rays of 2 molars and a vertebrae that were found. 3 days later, Dahmer was officially charged with Stephen Hicks's murder by Ohio authorities. He was not charged with the attempted murder of Tracy Edwards, and he was not charged with the murder of Stephen Tuomi.
I suppose that's where I suppose I kind of wonder with the Tracy. Tracy was the one that got away and got caught. Yeah. That's kind of where I'd like to know, where is the line between it being attempted murder and not being attempted murder? Because I suppose he had said about his intention to eat the heart, but he never made a move or attacked.
Like, he never harmed him physically, so I'm assuming
the intent was there, but they never got to the attempting part. So is that why the line was drawn there and it wasn't put forward?
So. Like,
but what would it be put forward as?
He probably could have been charged with kidnapping or holding someone against their will, but because he never physically harmed...
he never made a move on the attempt.
He never physically harmed Tracy, so he couldn't be charged with that.
Yeah, of course.
And then the reason that he wasn't charged with Stephen Tuomi's murder is that the Milwaukee County District Attorney only brings murder charges when there's proof beyond a reasonable doubt of murder.
Okay.
And with Dahmer having no memory of committing this murder and there being 0 physical evidence for the crime, they couldn't charge him.
Put enough together based on what he was saying because he didn't remember enough.
Yeah, it would have put reasonable doubt into the entire case.
Yeah, and you do also, I suppose, have... Like, obviously not in this case, but you do have people who come forward and admit to crimes they didn't commit, whatever that is about.
Yeah.
So, I suppose it's like, no evidence, he doesn't have any more details, therefore, as you said, that would put that bit of doubt in, which could affect the entire case, and they don't want that.
Yeah. So, Dahmer pleaded guilty but insane, to 15 counts of murder at a scheduled preliminary hearing on January 13th, 1992.
Okay. And then obviously on to the trial. Now there's various parts about the trial that piss me off in the way they deal with mental health. I know obviously in terms of Dahmer, what he did was horrible. He deserves his sentencing. He even owns up to that himself, saying he deserves what's given to him, which I will get onto. But it just really annoys me. So on January 30th, 1992, Jeffrey Dahmer's trial began. Dahmer was tried in Milwaukee for the 15 counts of first-degree murder before Judge Lawrence Graham. By pleading guilty to the charges on January 13th, Dahmer had waived his rights to an initial trial to establish guilt, as defined by Wisconsin law. Attorneys at Dahmer's trial debated whether he suffered from either a mental or a personality disorder. The prosecution claimed that any disorders did not deprive Dahmer of the ability to appreciate the criminality of his actions or to deprive him of the ability to resist his impulses. I'm 50-50 on that one because I don't entirely agree on the resisting of impulses depending on the state. Because I know, like, for the likes of you and me, those impulses would be, for example, buying stuff.
Yeah.
But if he had that same type of impulses I would get sometimes in terms of spending money,
it is very,
it's
very
something
hard
that
to
you,
resist.
yeah, and sometimes you just don't resist it and it just happens.
But at the same time, our experience with BPD is not the same as his experience with BPD.
Yeah, but what I'm saying is the impulse side of things, because he clearly still has impulses. So if our impulses, let's say, are money, but his version of that is what he's doing,
and I would imagine
then it makes sense that it would
the other,
be hard not to act on the impulse.
Yeah, and I would imagine with the other mental health issues that he had, it would make it probably 10 times harder to resist. No excuse.
No, but it helps get inside the mind of it.
Yeah.
The defense also argued that Dahmer suffered from a mental disease and was driven by obsession and impulses that he was unable to control, which, to some extent, for the most part, I, in my opinion, agree with the defense on the mental health grounds. Again, don't agree with what he did or anything like that, but I'm inclined to agree with the defence for most of the mental health stuff.
Would have influenced it.
Defence experts argued that due to his necrophilic drive, he was insane. A defence expert, Dr. Fred Berlin, testified that Dahmer was unable to control his conduct at the time that he committed his crimes due to his intense sexual arousal toward corpses, or paraphilia, necrophilia, etc. The second expert witness, Dr. Judith Becker, Professor of Psychiatry and Psychology, diagnosed Dahmer as a necrophiliac, although she also added that Dahmer had informed her he preferred comatose sexual partners to deceased ones, quote-unquote, 75% of the time.
Okay.
The last expert to testify for the defence was Dr. Karl Wallstrom, a forensic psychiatrist who diagnosed Dahmer with necrophilia, borderline personality disorder, schizotypal personality disorder, alcohol dependence, as well as a psychotic disorder.
Okay.
Like,
so
that's a lot going on.
There mentally.
Like, I can just about handle BPD alone sometimes.
Oh, I'm telling you, the BPD mixed with ADHD is a fucking nightmare.
Let's see. So then we're moving on to kind of testimonies, experts testifying for the prosecution. And these are the ones that for the most part piss me off, because I'm like, not only... They keep contradicting themselves as well, as far as I'm concerned. And they really, it just goes to show how much, maybe it's a global thing, but I suppose this is American, so I'm going to go by American law. How the prosecutions there seem to be so hell-bent on getting a conviction, and rightly so. Jeffrey Dahmer deserved to be convicted and deserved everything he got, conviction-wise. But go about it the right way. Don't be... Stop playing games and doing and trying to prove a point that isn't really correct just to get worse of a conviction.
I feel like...
Especially when he's not fighting against it. He's admitting to it all. You can give him whatever sentence you want and he'll take it.
Yeah, but like, I'm getting the vibe that in terms of something more recent, the Johnny Depp and Amber Heard trial, and obviously it came out that Amber Heard has, BPD and... histrionic personality disorder is what I think.
Something like that, I'm sure.
But in terms of her BPD, I remember I was raging for weeks because there was so many
misinformation
out there with misinformation about BPD, painting everyone who has BPD with the same brush.
I was so annoyed.
I understand that some people with BPD are manipulative and they are callous and they are
But to be honest, at the end of the day, every person on this planet is manipulative at some point.
Yeah. But I think for the most part, people with BPD are very, very misunderstood. Like, we struggle with so much in terms of profound empathy, deep feelings, whether they're positive or negative, and it's easy to get lost in that, and it can cause a lot of
statistically speaking pain. BPD is worse for the person who has it than anyone that gets hurt as a side effect. It doesn't make it okay that other people are getting hurt, but the person who's acting a certain type of way or whatever, it's normally worse for them.
Yeah, and especially, I think, I know myself, I have quiet BPD, I internalise it all. It's agonising. Like, before I got
exhausting.
diagnosed and started seeking out treatment and things, it was very difficult just to get through the day.
And just to interrupt, shout out to the Irish government, seem as not one of us, but two of us had to actually source the money. I'm not even going to say how much it was because it was atrocious amount. Like, as in, obviously fine because it was a private clinic, but we had to go private to find out what was wrong.
And the thing is, if you hadn't found that clinic, I wouldn't have found that clinic. And we'd both still be undiagnosed and struggling profoundly.
Like, the mental health services in this country are an absolute, honest to God, disgrace.
Let's not forget, we have to go and pay out of our own pockets
for the type of therapy we need. For the
type of therapy that we need, because the HSE
doesn't offer it in our region.
Cut the programme for our region, and we can't be referred to anywhere else. So, in conclusion, the Irish government can suck my toes.
You know, I don't like feet, but I still don't think that's even bad enough.
What if I don't wash my feet for a month and
still
then I make them suck my toes? Sorry, that's disgusting.
I hope nobody with a foot fetish is listening for your sake.
Oh, God.
Because you know your picture is on the podcast website.
Yeah, but not my feet.
Yeah, but they can imagine.
I don't know if they'd get my toes quite right. Anyway, sorry.
Don't know if they want to after that description.
That's our little tangent on the Irish mental health system in particular.
Yes, and anyway, so prosecution with their witnesses. Sorry, with their experts. On the 8th of February, Dr. Fred Fosdell testified for the prosecution. Dr. Fosdell testified to his belief that Dahmer was without mental disease or defect at the time he committed the murders. He described Dahmer as a calculating and cunning individual, able to tell the difference between right and wrong, with the ability to control his actions, and whose lust overpowered his morals. If his lust overpowered his morals, how was he able to control his actions? Mm-hmm. And also, how does someone with a diagnosis of BPD and all these other things how do they be without mental disease or defect at the time he committed the murders? Sorry, sweetie, it's always there. It just flares up and goes down every now and then. But even when it's not at a flare-up, it's still there. Trust me on that one. And this person is a... What did I say they were? Some sort of... Expert, anyway, yeah. But I was like, yeah. So this is just the start of me being pissed off with them anyway. Dr. Fosdell stated his belief that Dahmer was a paraphiliac. His conclusion was that Dahmer was not a sadist. And then Sorry, what were you going to say?
So he is a paraphiliac.
Even though a paraphiliac is basically considered that you can't control your sexual urges of something that's not atypical for someone to get with.
And as well, so he said he's not a sadist.
No.
Look at everything he's done to his victims.
Well, you see, I think the way he meant sadist is because I didn't actually notice until today. There's actually sadist as a sadistic personality disorder.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Neither did I until the research. So I think he meant it from a diagnostic point of view.
So he's not
a descriptive point of view, but from his professional opinion as a diagnostic.
But I would say he has sadistic
tendencies. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And then the second and final witness to appear for the prosecution was Park Dietz. Not sure if I'm pronouncing that right.
Not sure
who was a forensic psychiatrist. Park began his testimony on the 12th of February, and he testified that he did not believe Dahmer had any form of mental disease or defect at the time he committed the crimes, stating that Dahmer went to great lengths to be alone with his victims and to have no witnesses. You can plan things and still be mentally ill.
I was just going to say, just because you're mentally ill doesn't mean you're
incapable of planning.
Incapable of doing the things that he has done.
Yeah. Where was I? Oh yeah. He also explained that there was sufficient evidence that Dahmer prepared in advance for each murder, thus the crimes were not impulsive. Although Park did acknowledge any acquisition of a paraphilia was not a matter of personal choice, he stated his belief was that Dahmer's habit of becoming intoxicated before committing each murder was significant. Park testified that if Dahmer had an impulse to kill or a compulsion to kill, that he wouldn't have to drink alcohol to overcome it. He only has to drink alcohol to overcome it because he's inhibited against killing. So basically implying that the reason he drinks the alcohol is so he can do the killing. But sure, he's had alcohol problems since what, like 14, if not earlier. So I don't think
Like,
it had anything to do with that. I think it was just because he was an alcoholic, he happened to do that as well.
The alcoholism predates the murders.
Yeah, so he wasn't drinking in order to build up the courage to do what he was going to do.
If he's in a bar trying to pick up someone to kill them, he's obviously going to drink.
But even with one of his victims, Dahmer even said himself that one night he actually wasn't looking for anyone, but they came up to him, so it was an opportunity.
He likes places that sell alcohol,
yeah,
obviously, and it just
it's not just a victim shopping ground, it's an alcohol place. So that was, so that, as you can see, that's why I'm annoyed with both of their expert witnesses, because it's basically like, okay, we're testifying for the defence, so we're going to do our best to say that in our opinion his illnesses don't count towards his actions. What did I say?
Defence.
Oh, sorry, prosecution. Just to try and discredit as much as they could about his mental health in order to sounds like a typical government.
Yep.
But in order to get the worst that we can in this case. But Dahmer had already waived everything, pleaded guilty. The judge was entitled to give him the worst anyway, just going by Dahmer himself without any case needing to be built against him.
There was no need for them to get up on the stand.
All they needed to do was prove he did it.
Yeah, like they didn't have to be so, what's the word? Stupid.
Ignorant,
thank you. They didn't have to be so ignorant in regards to mental illness, because Dahmer aside, there undoubtedly was...
But there's just as much serial killers out there that have no diagnosis of anything.
Exactly.
If not more.
There's undoubtedly thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of people in the US at this time that were following this case that had these mental illnesses, that weren't murderers, and we're hearing all this.
It's like a more extreme version of, as you said, Amber Heard and Johnny Depp, in fact, of a certain type of disorder or something either being discredited or being blamed for everything or, something that's just not fair in a general sense.
Exactly.
So Park also noted that Dahmer strongly identified with the villains of The Exorcist 3 and The Return of the Jedi, particularly the level of power held by these characters.
And The Exorcist 3 was playing on the TV when Tracy Edwards was in the bedroom.
Putting forward the significance of these movies on Dahmer's psyche and many of the murders committed at the Oxford apartments. Park explained that Dahmer on occasion viewed scenes from these films before searching for a victim. Park diagnosed Dahmer with substance use disorder, paraphilia and schizotypal disorder. 2 court-appointed mental health professionals who were testifying independently of both the prosecution and defence, so impartially, were George Palermo, a forensic psychiatrist, and Samuel Friedman, a clinical psychologist. Palermo stated that the murders were a result of pent-up aggression within Dahmer, that he killed those men because he wanted to kill the source of his homosexual attraction to them. In killing them, he killed what he hated in himself. Palermo came to the conclusion that Dahmer had a severe mixed personality disorder with antisocial obsessive-compulsive, sadistic, fetishistic, borderline and necrophilic features, but otherwise legally sane. Samuel Friedman testified that it was a longing for companionship that caused Dahmer to kill and testified that Dahmer was not psychotic. Friedman described Dahmer as amiable, pleasant to be with, courteous, with a sense of humour, conventionally handsome and charming in manner. He said Dahmer was and still is a bright young man. He diagnosed Dahmer with a personality disorder not otherwise specified, featuring borderline, obsessive-compulsive and sadistic traits. All of that sounds a lot more, I suppose, done right compared to the prosecution's witnesses. Now, I'm not sure what they mean with what the first one means, what Palermo means by but otherwise legally sane. I would like to assume he's meaning legally sane in order to the way Dahmer's throwing himself under the bus and putting his hands up and not fighting it. Because I don't think... I'd like to think he doesn't mean what the previous mean legally sane at the time of the murders, because he's clearly not. But legally sane, I'm pretty sure means in terms of being prosecuted, doesn't it?
Yeah, in terms of prosecution.
So, like, you can prosecute away.
There's a specific phrase for it. It's not... My brain is saying mentally competent to stand trial, but that's not it.
I think legally sane is the term, to be honest.
Trial, yeah. So as in, like, he was legally sane to the point of being able to...
He was able to own up to everything and take his punishment and refuse lawyers or whatever, like he did in the interviews
his,
and stuff.
Decision making
was there.
Impacted.
Yeah. During the trial.
Yeah.
And now on to you.
So I have just a brief few words on the closing arguments. So Dahmer's trial lasted 2 weeks. And on February 14th, 1992, both the defence and prosecuting attorneys were allowed to speak for 2 hours in their closing arguments. So Dahmer's attorney, Gerald Boyle, went first. He frequently referenced testimonies from mental health professionals because almost all of them had agreed that Dahmer was afflicted with a mental health disease. That's a direct quote, mental health disease. Boyle argued that Dahmer's murders were compulsive and as a result of a sickness that he discovered, not chose. He went on to portray Dahmer as a desperately lonely and profoundly sick individual who was, quote, so out of control he could not conform his conduct anymore.
That is what I would agree with.
Now, following Boyle's 75-minute closing argument, prosecuting attorney Michael McCann gave his closing argument where he described Dahmer as a sane man in full control of his actions who simply wanted to avoid detection. McCann described him as a calculating individual who killed to control his victims and kept their bodies so he could have a prolonged period of sexual pleasure. McCann argued that by pleading guilty but insane to the charges, Dahmer was looking to escape responsibility for his crimes. Now, I do have to disagree with this, especially the last sentence of him trying to escape responsibility for his crimes, because as much as I dislike the man, as much as I hate everything he's done, he was, as you said, very cooperative with the police, very forthcoming. He gave details.
He admitted to stuff they'd no evidence for and everything.
Yeah, now, as I said, I'm not trying to justify what he did, I'm not trying to defend it, but you can't argue that he was very forthcoming and he admitted to things that he didn't have to admit to because the police didn't know about them.
Yeah.
In terms of him wanting to avoid detection, I don't think he was trying to avoid detection, to be honest. He let those police officers, twice he left police officers into his apartment knowing that there was body parts and knowing that there was bodies.
Detection obviously wasn't ideal if it happened, but he was just kind of like, what will be, it seems, because I suppose while you might say a lot of the stuff, like, I know a lot of sections they say like that it seemed planned and calculated, but as well it just kind of seemed like he just took opportunities, but he had the know-how of how to dispose and everything. It wasn't a case of he planned the disposals, it was just a case of he knew what to do.
Yeah, and he obviously,
if the situation arises and you do something like that with someone and you know how to deal with it, you're going to deal with it.
And in terms of the murders being premeditated, we'll say, I don't think they were premeditated in terms of he knew who he was going to kill, but more in terms of
how and what he was doing.
And he went out that night
to look,
intending to look for victims.
Yeah. But it wasn't premeditated to a specific person. It was just like, this is what I do, might keep that to eat.
I think the victims...
Might keep this for my altar.
I think the victims were victims of opportunity, but 90% of the time the crime itself was planned.
What was being done was normally seemed to be some bit premeditated at least, but who was...
And then in terms of the dismemberment and the disposal, I think that's just something he enjoyed.
Like, because he chose what he wanted to keep, got rid of what he didn't.
Yeah, like... Ugh.
Yeah.
Yeah, so...
Okay.
Gross.
So then, regarding the conviction, on the 15th of February, the court reconvened in order to hear the verdict. Dahmer was ruled to be sane, which I completely disagree with, and not suffering from a mental disorder at the time of each of the 15 murders for which he was tried.
Okay.
It makes no sense to me.
No.
Now, let's see. Although in each count, 2 of the 12 jurors signified their disagreement with this verdict. Mm-hmm. Are we the 2?
Yeah.
So when was that? Formal sentencing was then postponed until the 17th of February. On this date, Dahmer's attorney announced that his client would like to address the court. Dahmer then went up to a lectern and read from a statement prepared by him and his defence as he faced the judge. And instead of actually reading anything out, I'm actually going to play the statement.
Okay.
So here is Dahmer's statement that he read out in front of the courts.
Your Honor, it is over now. This has never been a case of trying to get free. I didn't ever want freedom. Frankly, I wanted death for myself. This was a case to tell the world that I did what I did not for reasons of hate. I hated no one. I knew I was sick or evil or both. Now I believe I was sick. The doctors have told me about my sickness, and now I have some peace. I know how much harm I have caused. I tried to do the best I could after the arrest to make amends, but no matter what I did, I could not undo the terrible harm I have caused. My attempt to help identify the remains was the best that I could do, and that was hardly anything. I feel so bad for what I did to those poor families, and I understand their rightful hate. I know I will be in prison for the rest of my life. I know that I will have to turn to God to help me get through each day. I should have stayed with God. I tried and failed and created a holocaust. Thank God there will be no more harm that I can do. I believe that only the Lord Jesus Christ can save me from my sins. I have instructed Mr. Boyle to end this matter. I do not want to contest the civil case. I've told Mr. Boyle to try and finalize them if he can. If there is ever any money, I want it to go to the victims' families. I have talked to Mr. Boyle about other things that might help ease my conscience in some way of coming up with ideas on how to make some amends to these families, and I will work with him on that. I want to return to Ohio and quickly end that matter so that I can put all of this behind me and then come right back here to do my sentence. I decided to go through this trial for a number of reasons. One of the reasons was to let the world know that these were not hate crimes. I wanted the world in Milwaukee, which I deeply hurt, to know the truth of what I did. I didn't want unanswered questions. All the questions have now been answered. I wanted to find out just what it was that caused me to be so bad and evil. But most of all, Mr. Boyle and I decided that maybe there was a way for us to tell the world that if there are people out there with these disorders, maybe they can get some help before they end up being hurt or hurting someone. I think the trial did that. I take all the blame for what I did. I hurt many people. The judge in my earlier case tried to help me, and I refused his help, and he got hurt by what I did. I hurt those policemen in the Conorak matter, and I shall ever regret causing them to lose their jobs. And I hope and pray that they can get their jobs back, because I know they did their best, and I just plain fooled them. For that I am so sorry. I know I hurt my probation officer, who was really trying to help me. I am so sorry for that, and sorry for everyone else that I have hurt. I have hurt my mother and father and stepmother. I love them all so very much. I hope that they will find the same peace I am looking for. Mr. Boyle's associates, Wendy and Ellen, have been wonderful to me, helping me through this worst of all times. I want to publicly thank Mr. Boyle. He didn't need to take this case, but when I asked him to help me find the answers and to help others, if I could, he stayed with me and went way overboard in trying to help me. Mr. Boyle and I agreed that it was never a matter of trying to get off. It was only a matter of which place I would be housed the rest of my life, not for my comfort, but for trying to study me in the hopes of helping me and learning to help others who might have problems. I know I will be in prison. I pledge to talk to doctors who might be able to find some answers. In closing, I just want to say that I hope God has forgiven me. I know society will never be able to forgive me. I know the families of the victims will never be able to forgive me for what I have done. I promise I will pray each day to ask for their forgiveness when the hurt goes away, if ever. I have seen their tears, and if I could give my life right now to bring their loved ones back, I would do it. I am so very sorry. Your Honor, I know that you are about to sentence me. I ask for no consideration. I want you to know that I have been treated perfectly by the deputies who have been in your court and the deputies who work the jail. The deputies have treated me very professionally, and I want everyone to know that. They have not given me special treatment. Here is a trustworthy saying that deserves full acceptance. Christ Jesus came into the world to save sinners, of who I am the worst. But for that very reason I was shown mercy, so that in me, the worst of sinners, Christ Jesus might display his unlimited patience as an example for those who would believe in him and receive an eternal life. Now to the King eternal, immortal, invisible, the only God, be honor and glory forever and ever. I know my time in prison will be terrible, but I deserve whatever I get because of what I have done. Thank you, Your Honor, and I am prepared for your sentence, which I know will be the maximum. I ask for no consideration.
So that was Jeffrey Dahmer's, what he addressed the court for, what he wanted to say to the judge, and as you can hear, he didn't want any,
any clemency or any special consideration.
Exactly.
I don't want to say impressed.
I get what you mean, though.
But
he genuinely, regardless of what he did and not excusing any of it, seemed remorseful and
very self-aware to me.
Yeah.
In terms of, he seemed to genuinely understand how his actions and his crimes had affected other people, and he seemed to be very aware of the wrong in it.
Yeah.
And even for a murderer to tell the court, I don't want any special consideration, give me the maximum, I understand that's what I deserve.
Yeah.
That is not impressive, that's not the word, but
it's impressive of that type of person.
Yeah, that's probably a better way to phrase it. But yeah, also that was the first time I ever heard Jeffrey Dahmer's voice, I'm sure. Yeah,
I was the same. What else was I going to say? And as well, as I mentioned in a second, people might say, oh, but he's probably trying, to not get this certain punishment or not get that certain punishment. The death penalty wasn't an option, so it's not like he was trying to lick arse his way into not getting killed. Penalty. Because even in it, he said he'd happily die.
And even if the death penalty was on the table, he
literally just turned around though and said that if he could die, or give me the maximum.
But as well, if the death penalty was on the table and it was a case of him wanting to get away with it or not get the death penalty or not get the maximum sentence, he could have made a plea deal or a plea bargain.
The whole trial he would have had to have handled differently had he wanted any kind of leeway. But anyway, obviously, after that statement, Dahmer returned to his seat to await formal sentencing, and he was then sentenced to life imprisonment plus 10 years upon the first 2 counts. The remaining 13 counts carried a mandatory sentence of life imprisonment plus 70 years. The death penalty was not an option for Judge Graham to consider at the penalty phase because Wisconsin had abolished capital punishment in 1853. So I actually think that's quite interesting because
a lot of states,
that's in 1853, but not even states. In the 1900s, we were still hanging people in Ireland.
The last person executed by guillotine in France was in the 1970s.
Yeah.
That's fucking crazy.
Do you know, that's 1970s. Actually, I'm not going to continue that.
Okay. You can tell me after.
Where was I? Oh yeah. So after hearing Dahmer sentencing, his father Lionel and stepmother Shari requested to be allowed a 10-minute private meeting with Jeffrey before he was moved to the Columbia Correctional Institution in Portage to begin his sentence. This request was allowed, and they exchanged hugs and well wishes with Dahmer before he was escorted away. 3 months after his conviction in Milwaukee, Dahmer was extradited to Ohio to be tried for the murder of Stephen Hicks, his first victim. This court hearing lasted only 45 minutes, and Dahmer again pleaded guilty to the charges and was sentenced to a 16th term of life imprisonment on the 1st of May 1992.
Right, so as Josh said, after his sentencing, Dahmer was sent to the Columbia Correctional Institution, and for the first year that he was there, he was kept in solitary confinement due to concerns for his physical safety if he was to come into contact with other inmates. Now, after a year in solitary confinement, with Dahmer's consent, he was transferred to a less secure unit where he was assigned a 2-hour daily work detail cleaning the toilet block. Now, shortly after he finished his lengthy confessions in 1991, Dahmer had made a request to a Detective Murphy for a Bible. After this request was granted, Dahmer gradually devoted himself to Christianity, becoming a born-again Christian. With some prompting from his father, he also read creationist books from the Institute for Creation Research. Now, creationism is the belief that the universe and all living beings within the universe were created by a divine being, usually God.
Okay, so that one's kind of more like, open in the sense of, like, for example, I wouldn't call myself atheist because, but, like, while I don't believe in a god or anything like that, in a spirituality sense, I do believe in, like, an overall energy. I suppose that could, in its own way, maybe slip in.
Well, I think I actually told a little lie there. I think creationism is like the Adam and Eve story.
Oh, okay.
Okay. So, sorry about that. So, like, he would have read creationist books about how God created the universe and all that's in it.
So that could be open to interpretation in sense of, for different religions, you could change the God to fit your story if you wanted, but obviously this is more
it's Christian,
Catholic Christian basis.
So it would be that God created the universe.
Yeah. Adam, Eve, babies, snakes,
apples, Garden of Eden, the whole shebang. So he was baptized in May 1994 in the prison whirlpool. Don't know what that is.
Okay, I'm assuming it's... Do you know how some people get dunked into water to get christened?
Yeah.
I'm assuming maybe they had a section for christening born-again Christian prisoners.
Yeah, to me, instantly, I heard prison whirlpool, I thought toilet.
Getting a worry.
I highly doubt that's what happened, but that's just where my brain went. So he was baptized by Roy Ratcliffe, a minister in the Church of Christ, and after the baptism, Ratcliffe visited Dahmer once a week until November 1994. They frequently discussed the topic of death, and Dahmer questioned whether he was sinning against God by continuing to live. In a 1994 interview with Stone Phillips on Dateline NBC, Dahmer stated the following in reference to his crimes, and this is a direct quote.
Okay.
If a person doesn't think that there is a God to be accountable to, then what's the point of trying to modify your behaviour to keep it within acceptable ranges? That's how I thought anyway. On July 3rd, 1991, Osvaldo Dorothy, a fellow inmate, tried to slit Dahmer's throat with a razor embedded in a toothbrush as Dahmer sat in the prison chapel following the weekly church service. Dahmer had superficial wounds and was not seriously injured in this incident. According to Dahmer's family, he had long been ready for death and accepted any punishment he might endure in prison. His father, stepmother and his mother all maintained regular contact with him. So
he basically saw attacks on him from other prisoners basically as good as being as part of his punishment for everything he'd done.
Yeah, I would assume so. So his father, stepmother and his mother all maintained regular contact with him. Now, prior to Dahmer being arrested, he hadn't actually seen his mother, Joyce, since Christmas 1983.
So quite some time.
Joyce later said that in her weekly phone calls, when she would express concern for her son's well-being, he would respond with, "It doesn't matter, Mom, I don't care if something happens to me," or something along those lines. So every time she would express
And I think
concern.
that further goes to prove about his statement in court about that what he was saying, he wasn't just saying it for the sake of the judge, because he's continued that mindset on private conversations with family, you know, and so on.
I think he truly saw
the wrong he had done,
what was going to happen to him in prison, and he saw it as his penance almost, especially after he became more religious.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's what I have on the imprisonment.
Okay, so, and then back to me then, is that?
Back to you.
Perfect.
Yes.
So...
back to you, Josh.
In the studio. During the morning of the 28th of November 1994, Jeffrey Dahmer left his cell to conduct his assigned work detail. He was accompanied by two fellow inmates, Jesse Anderson and Christopher Scarver. Jesse Anderson was convicted for murder, as was Christopher Scarver. The trio, Jeffrey, Jesse and Christopher, were left unsupervised in the showers of the prison gym for around 20 minutes. Then at approximately 8:10 a.m, Dahmer was discovered on the floor of the bathrooms of the gym with extreme head wounds. Dahmer had been severely bludgeoned around the head and face with a 20-inch metal bar. His head had also been struck repeatedly against a wall during the assault. Even though Dahmer was still alive and was rushed to a nearby hospital, an hour later he was pronounced dead. Jesse Anderson had been beaten with the same metal bar and died 2 days later from his wounds.
Oh.
Christopher Scarver, who was serving a life sentence for a murder he had committed in 1990, told the authorities that he had first attacked Dahmer with the metal bar as Dahmer was cleaning a staff locker room, before then attacking Anderson as Anderson was cleaning an inmate locker room. According to Scarver, Dahmer did not yell or make any noise as he was attacked. Straight after attacking Dahmer and Anderson, Scarver, who was thought to be schizophrenic, went back to his cell and then informed a prison guard that, quote, "God told me to do it. Jesse Anderson and Jeffrey Dahmer are dead," unquote. Scarver insisted that he had not planned the attacks in advance, but he later divulged to investigators that he had concealed the iron bar he used in his clothing not long before the killings. After learning about the death of her son, Dahmer's mother Joyce responded angrily to the media, quote, "Now is everybody happy? Now that he's bludgeoned to death, is that good enough for everyone?" unquote. There was a mixed response from the families of Dahmer's victims. Some celebrated the news, meanwhile others were saddened. The mother of Oliver Lacey, Catherine Lacey, remarked, "The hurt is worse now because he's not suffering like we are." The district attorney that prosecuted Dahmer warned against turning Christopher Scarver into a folk hero, noting that at the end of the day Dahmer's death was still a murder. On the 15th of May 1995, Scarver was sentenced to 2 additional terms of life imprisonment for the murders of Jeffrey Dahmer and Jesse Anderson. In Jeffrey Dahmer's will, he had stated that he wished for no services to be held and that he wished to be cremated. Dahmer's body was cremated in September 1995 and his ashes were divided between his parents. And that's that, and it's shared custody.
Right, okay. So, because I was wondering why Scarver had also killed Anderson, but obviously if it was an episode...
It could have been an, how do you say, is it aural? Auditorial hallucination of, as he claims, God telling him to do it.
To kill Jeffrey and Anderson.
Unless he just used that as an excuse and felt like getting a bit of killing out.
Sorry, I called him Jeffrey, that felt weird. I've been calling him Dahmer this whole time.
And now your next bit.
So, just a bit on kind of the aftermath of Dahmer's crimes. So on August 5th, 1991, as Dahmer's crimes were starting to, well, as they'd already kind of were coming to light, a candlelit vigil was held to celebrate and heal the Milwaukee community. It was attended by more than 400 people, including community leaders, gay rights activists, and family members of Dahmer's victims. The vigil organisers said that its purpose was to enable people to share their feelings of pain and anger over what had happened. Dahmer's murders took place during a time of heightened racial tension in Milwaukee. Walter Farrell later said that race relations in the city had been, quote, in a state of disrepair for nearly a decade at the time of Dahmer's arrest. In August 1991, while in an interview with the Christian Science Monitor, Farrell stated that the news of the murders, excuse me, as well as the conduct of officers John Balzac, John Balsarzak and Joseph Gabrish, whatever, in relation to victim Conorak Synthasamphone had only exacerbated and highlighted racial tensions in the city.
Yeah.
And I agree.
100%.
The way those two officers conducted themselves.
If that was a white boy,
yeah, it wouldn't have happened.
Straight to the hospital.
It wouldn't have happened, but because
background check, the whole lot.
Was Asian, that's how he was 100%. Treated. And I think it's absolutely right that those two officers lost their jobs because.
Oh, and that's the one thing I don't think Dahmer should have felt the need to apologise for in his statement. They don't deserve it.
Gave you a look because that was their own fault. That was nothing to do with Dahmer.
Yeah, like fair enough, they were in that situation because of something you did, but how they handled it is entirely on them.
Exactly. Like, I would say their conduct regarding Conorak Synthasamphone was shameful to the Shield. And that's the only way I can phrase it. Because at the end of the day, when you go into any police force in any country in the world, you are supposed to
protect everyone
regardless of their race, regardless of their sexual orientation, their gender, their religion. We are all equal and we all deserve the same right to protection and safety.
And unfortunately, it's still an issue.
It's still an issue
to this day.
Absolutely it is. And that's because there's so many small-minded, stupid little people in the world.
Trying to make up for a little dick.
Mm-hmm. So, as well, Milwaukee's gay scene was generally underground and transient, with lots of sexually active gay men using aliases at the time of Dahmer's murders, because they obviously didn't want to be found out. They didn't want to risk anyone knowing that they were gay. So after the murders became known publicly, many in the city's gay community were nervous of others' intentions, and there was a sense of fear and distrust amongst the gay community. Now, thankfully,
because the one area that I suppose was being targeted by Dahmer was the gay scene because he was gay.
Yeah. Now, thankfully, this was short-lived, and as the 90s progressed, the usage of aliases faded away and became much less common, and this sense of fear and distrust faded away, I would hope, entirely.
Yeah. But I think anyone part of any community that's, considered a minority group, there's always some form of it.
Someone that you have to fear and someone that you have to distrust. And it's so...
But it can even be as simple not wanting to hold hands with someone of the same sex in public.
Yeah.
Been there.
Yeah, exactly. And even the fact that that's a thought that has to pass through people's head is disgraceful.
You have to do like a fucking questionnaire in your head to figure out, right, what way can I act in this area without getting gay bashed?
Mm-hmm. And
and obviously same with other things. It's just my experience is being gay.
In the US...
it could be anything.
Like in the US, I know...
In certain areas, it could just be being female.
It could be being female, or like one example that I would be familiar with would be a lot of people of colour in the US have for years been training their children on how to behave and how to act
100%.
if they're stopped by the police, because obviously the police
it's upsetting
hurting and killing people of colour and people of minority groups in the States, and not just in the States. I'm not just singling out the US.
It's a global issue. It's just the US comes out with the most of it, to be honest.
And especially since George Floyd and everything like that. And it's just heartbreaking to think that these families are sitting down their young children to tell them, okay, if the police ever pull you over, if the police ever stop you, you keep your hands visible at all times.
But I think even in a general sense, like as far as I know, it's not like people here, even guards, are not as trigger happy.
Mm-hmm. That's because they don't have guns.
Oh yeah, they don't actually. It's only we
have the armed response unit, which is brought out for certain occasions, like raids or if there's a standoff and someone is armed. But for the most part, like the Irish Guards, the only weapon they
don't
have,
need guns because they call in the people trained properly with the guns when needed.
Which is how it should be, but then there are instances of Irish Guards getting a bit too happy with their fists.
Yes, 100%.
And like I know of people who've been taken to cells in a certain place that we know well.
Yeah.
And instead of like doing whatever they should be doing properly, like the guards will just batter them.
Oh no,
themselves.
I've heard of similar things happening to people, because of being considered an ethnic minority, so full on racist, like.
Yeah, well, for
and
me, it
by
was
the
more
guards.
just that they were acting like little scumbags.
They were
and getting
just on a
cheeky
power trip.
and getting cheeky with the guards, and the guards didn't like it. No,
guards-
it's not all members of An Garda Síochána.
No, of
obviously,
course.
but I know of certain
They're there.
guards who
But it just goes to
don't
show no matter
like-
where you are in the world, there is people
who
in
are on
it,
power trips,
power
who
trips,
have no business carrying a badge,
or
let alone a gun.
discriminative, yeah.
But anyway, in conclusion, fuck John Balzac and his friend Joseph. Where was I? Oh yeah, so Dahmer's apartment was
Okay.
demolished in November 1992. It's now a vacant lot. There were plans to
So I'm assuming the whole
convert-
complex was demolished. Okay.
now there were plans to convert the lot into a memorial garden or a playground or new housing, but none of these plans have ever come to fruition.
Well, in my opinion, I definitely would want a playground there.
No.
I find a memorial ground might,
Be a bit more respectful to the victims.
in one sense, respectful, in another way, disrespectful.
Yeah, like...
I'm like, why should their memorial be where he chose to bring them?
Exactly, it should be somewhere that's important to them.
Or even just give them, like, in a park somewhere as
A
a
bench
as a
or
city
plaque
council
or
or whatever,
some kind of
set
little garden
a
or
little
something.
flower garden or something
Yeah.
in Milwaukee for them.
Yeah.
And then maybe another one
Like,
in...
it doesn't have to be the place that they were murdered.
Yeah.
It can be just
It's the
somewhere-
sentiment.
It can just be somewhere nice and peaceful.
Yeah.
Their families and the people that knew them and loved them can go.
Now, of course, if
and-
the family wanted a memorial there, then brilliant,
Yeah,
go ahead.
yeah.
But
do think
I
it
would be
has-
on
it
the
would
fence
be-
with that one.
It would be something that would have to be run by the families, in my opinion.
Oh, yeah.
Dahmer's estate, after he died, was awarded to the families of his victims.
As he wanted.
Families of his victims who had sued for damages. In 1996, Thomas Jacobson, who was a lawyer representing 8 of the families, announced that Dahmer's estate would be auctioned off. Now, despite the families stating that the motivation for this was not to do with greed, it did still spark controversy.
Yeah, but you know what? Even if it was to do with getting some money, they're fucking right too.
Yeah, exactly. So what happened was a civic
Just because
group-
someone wants some money doesn't take away from what they've been through.
Exactly. Now, a civic group called Milwaukee Civic Pride was quickly established so that they could raise funds to purchase and destroy Dahmer's possessions. They pledged $407,225. This included a $100,000 gift from Milwaukee real estate developer
Okay.
Joseph Zilber to buy the estate. 5 of the 8 families agreed to this deal, and so Dahmer's possessions were destroyed and buried in an undisclosed Illinois landfill. Now, I think what that was that they didn't want his possessions to be sold off to people for the wrong reasons.
Yeah, or they didn't want people that are obsessed with serial killers.
Regardless of the families not selling them out of greed, whatever their motivation was for selling them, you can never be too unsure of the intentions of the buyer.
Yeah.
And I understand kind of that and why they made this group and bought the possessions and destroyed them and won't disclose the location of where they're
I think
disposed
that's
of.
fair.
I think so too. Now, Lionel Dahmer is now retired and living with his second wife, Shari. Both have chosen not to change their surname and have said that despite Jeffrey's crimes, they still love him. In 1994, Lionel published his book, A Father's Story, and donated a portion of the proceeds to the victims' families.
Yeah.
While most of the families showed support for Lionel and Shari, 2 families sued for using their names in his book without their consent, and Stephen Hicks' family filed a wrongful death suit against Lionel, Shari and Joyce, citing parental neglect as cause for the claim. Now, I don't know what came of that.
That's a bit fucking much, in my opinion.
Now, Joyce, his...
Don't get me wrong, there was definitely parental neglect in that childhood and whatnot.
Yeah.
But it's a bit of a reach.
Yeah, like...
I know there's still nature and nurture and whatnot, but...
So
you could have been better parents, but I don't think by doing that...
Like, it's not their fault by
You didn't
extension.
think, oh, I'm making a killer, call me.
making a murderer.
You know what I mean?
No.
And even with his father wasn't around due to work, and then when he was around, Joyce, his mother, was taking all the attention. And obviously I want to add that, like, I'm not necessarily, like, trying to talk bad or slag Joyce, because obviously, you know, she was suffering from mental
She had her
health
own
issues
yeah.
as well. But at the same time, that doesn't justify the neglect of Jeffrey Dahmer as a child. It doesn't excuse it. Like,
and I suppose, like, a certain part of me does feel for, like, Jeffrey Dahmer as a child.
Yes.
Not as an adult, because he was making his own decisions. Now, in terms of the mental illness and things, I kind of understand, but obviously I can't understand the full extent.
I empathise with him in multiple different ways, but I also don't excuse or want to excuse what he did.
That's what I'm trying to say.
Because it's hard to tell what was, if any of it was him of his own, what you could call free will, or if all of it was the multiple disorders going on all at once in his head.
Yeah, and like I was saying, a certain part of me, like a certain part of my heart does go out to young Jeffrey Dahmer when he was a child, and he was, you know, desperately trying to just get a bit of attention, because that's what kids want. They want attention. They need it. It's a part of their development. Part of how they develop. And especially in terms of, like, because I've studied child development and all that, like, so much of how we socialize and how we form connections and bonds with people comes from what we are shown and how we are treated in childhood.
Yeah.
And I don't know, a certain part of my heart just breaks for, like, the image of this little 4-year-old blonde kid just desperately looking for attention. But
it's the nature versus nurture, in the sense that if he was treated differently or better and given the right attention, and if Joyce didn't have her, you know, depression that seemed to, I suppose, be to an extent almost debilitating, would things have turned out differently? Would he have lived a good and happy life and not done everything that he did?
I kept thinking, when you were talking about his mental health issues and things, like, if he had been diagnosed sooner. Now, obviously, it was the times. Mental health wasn't viewed the way it is now. There was still such a massive stigma, and even today, there's basically ignored. Stigma. Yeah, it didn't exist. Like, if he'd gotten help in time. Yeah, if he'd gotten the help he needed, if he'd been treated the way he needed, would he ever have killed anyone? Maybe
he would have had the urges, but had the ability from treatment
to not act on them.
Exactly.
Yeah. So it's a tough one in terms of that, because obviously I do think his crimes were horrific. I think the things he did to people were disgusting and deplorable, but at the same time maybe it's just the, like, scientist in me, I am curious to know how he would have turned out if his life had been different.
Yeah, no, I'm the very same, to be honest.
Look, I have just a little bit left here, and then we'll get on to the victims themselves. So Joyce, Jeffrey's mother, I still find it weird when I call him Jeffrey, but anyway.
Yeah, I kind of, during mine, alternated between the two of them.
I think I called him Dahmer for most of it. So Joyce died of cancer in November 2000, and David, his younger brother, has changed his surname and lives in anonymity. Now, I didn't bother looking into David because he wants to live in anonymity. That's his choice. I respect that.
And yeah, I would definitely agree with that as well. Like, you know, if
there's no point in infringing on his privacy for a podcast, like.
Yeah.
But yeah, so that's all I have on that.
So then, where is my thing? And there we go. So then moving on to kind of focusing on the victims, again. So Jeffrey Dahmer killed 17 young men between the years of 1978 and 1991. 12 of these victims were killed in his North 25th Street apartment. 3 were murdered and dismembered in West Allis at his grandmother's house. Dahmer's first and second victims were murdered in Ohio at his parents' and in the Ambassador Hotel in Milwaukee. A total of 14 of Dahmer's victims were from various different ethnic minority backgrounds, with 9 of the victims being black. Jeffrey Dahmer was insistent that the race of his victims was of no importance to him, and that it was the body form of a potential victim that attracted his attention. And these claims have been supported by an independent forensics specialist study of Dahmer's victim selection, the anthropological analysis of which revealed his victims shared a morphological similarity and suggesting Dahmer was psychologically attracted to a certain anthropometric body type.
Because we know he was fascinated by the
chest
and the torso.
Stuff like that. So it was nothing to do with
the race.
With the race, it was just
like
what
that.
he was attracted to.
Yeah.
Simple as whether they were white, black, Hispanic,
a
Asian.
normal person might just have sex with them, but not Jeffrey.
Yeah. No, not Jeffrey at all. Now, the majority of Dahmer's victims were killed by strangulation after being drugged with sedatives. Jeffrey Dahmer's first victim was killed by a combination of bludgeoning and strangulation, and his second victim beat to death, with one further victim killed in 1990, Ernest Miller, dying of a combination of shock and blood loss due to his carotid artery being cut.
Because he was the one that had only the 2 sleeping pills.
4 of his victims killed in 1991 had holes drilled into their skulls, through which Dahmer injected hydrochloric acid or later boiling water into the frontal lobes in what he said, as mentioned before, was an attempt to induce a permanent, submissive, unresistant state. This, as you would expect, was fatal, even though on these occasions this was not Dahmer's intention. And then that's kind of it on that. So now I suppose we're kind of finishing off the episode with just a little bit about the victims, not in a Dahmer-centered way.
We know
almost
it can be
like
kind
paying
of
tribute.
hard. Yeah, we know it can be kind of hard to separate things when you're just listening to a podcast, and we wanted to make sure that the victims had more said about them than just how they died and what happened to them. So
now there wasn't much,
but
we did what we could,
and we just have a few kind of sentences on each of the victims that we want to go through.
So we're just going to alternate, and Tanya, you're going to begin.
The first victim, Stephen Mark Hicks, was born on June 22nd, 1959 in Cuyahoga Falls, Ohio. He was 18 years old and had just graduated from Coventry High School. He was described by those who knew him and loved him as a kind-hearted and compassionate individual who loved to help others and was always open to making new friends.
And then the next one, Stephen Walter Tuomi, who was 28 years old. Stephen was brought up in Ontonagon, I don't know if I'm saying that right, in Michigan, and in 1981 he graduated from Ontonagon Area High School. Stephen also worked as a short order cook in a Milwaukee restaurant. He's remembered by his classmates as quiet but artistic. This is a quote. I was in art class with him and he made a beautiful lead lead stained glass lamp that I can still remember, said classmate Priscilla Marley Chenoweth. She also said it was just beautiful. I remember he could do just about anything artistic.
Next we have James Edward Dockstader. James was born on March 1st, 1973, and he was known as Jamie. He was 14 years old, and his mother Debbie described him as independent and outgoing, saying he had a lot of love. A comment left on Find a Grave, which is where I got my information about him, reads, Shikoli Jamie, we send you well wishes from Oneida Nation of the Thames. We are sorry that your life ended the way that it did, and we hope your afterlife has been full of love with the ancestors there to take care of you. You are not forgotten.
Next was Richard Guerrero, who was 25 years old. He came from a family of Mexican descent. He was devoted to his family and would often take his mother to do shopping and run errands, and of course he was very loved by his family.
Anthony Lee Sears was born January 28th, 1989. He was 24 years old, and his loved ones and acquaintances described him as a kind and generous individual who loved to help others and was always ready to face everything with a smile. He made friends without effort because of his amiable nature, and he aspired to be a model.
Raymond Lamont Smith, also known as Ricky Beeks, who had a daughter that was 10 years old at the time. He was 33 years old, and he wore his nickname the same way he wore a baseball cap, like a daring sign of independence.
I love that. I absolutely love that. Edward Warren Smith was born in 1963. I couldn't find an exact birth date for him, and was referred to as Eddie or Sheik. He was between 26 and 27 years old and often wore a turban-like head covering, hence the nickname Sheik. He is remembered as loving, trusting and respectful, and he also aspired to be a model.
Ernest Marquez Miller was 22 years old. He was a dance student and hoped to become a professional dancer. He is remembered by his aunt as a talented dancer, and she also said he was singing and performing when he was younger and he used to sing at church.
David Courtney Thomas was born in 1967. Again, I couldn't find an exact birth date, and was between 22 and 23 years old. He had a 3-year-old daughter who he would visit regularly until the time of his disappearance. His ex-girlfriend described him as a fun-loving guy who had a penchant for hustling.
Curtis Durrell Straughter was 17 years old. Curtis lived with his grandmother and had been working as a nursing assistant, as well as having plans to become a model and to finish college.
Errol Lindsay was born on March 3rd, 1972. He was 19 years old. This year, his sister Rita said, quote, "When I think of my brother, I think of how he was such a goofball, and I think he's going to appreciate the fact that I'm still standing for him until my last breath. He knows that I'm still here for him," unquote. Unbeknownst to the public, Errol had a daughter born in the same year as his disappearance and murder. She is now 31 years old and has a daughter of her own, and I've not included her name for privacy and to respect her privacy.
Anthony Hughes was 21 years old. He went by the name of Tony and was deaf. His mother Shirley described her son as outgoing, jolly, happy and someone who could easily make friends. He had come back home to visit his Milwaukee family from Madison, which is where he was living.
Conorak Synthesamphone was born on December 1st, 1976 in Laos. Josh explained it better earlier, or in the last episode. He was 14 years old. He was a freshman in high school and enjoyed playing soccer, and he was much loved by his family.
Matt Cleveland Turner was 20 years old, a native of Flint, Michigan. He lived in Chicago and he was an aspiring model and was remembered as bright and articulate and a good kid.
Jeremiah Benjamin Weinberger was born on September 29th, 1967. He was 23 years old. He was remembered with love by his family, and his roommate said that he loved art and was very meticulous and always well dressed.
Oliver Joseph Lacey was 23 years old, had a 2-year-old son at the time, and he was engaged to be married. Oliver was the youngest of 3 sons. He was originally from Oak Park, Illinois, and he ran track at River Forest High School. His mother, Catherine, described him as very outspoken. He wore a cross around his neck that belonged to his late father, and he had moved to Milwaukee from Chicago within months of his father's passing.
Joseph Arthur Braidhoft was born on January 24th, 1966, and he was 25 years old. He had recently moved to Milwaukee and had a wife and 3 children ranging in age from 2 to 7 at the time of his death, and he loved sports and fishing.
And that
he was the final murder
concludes the victim kind of tribute / breakdown.
Mm-hmm.
Honestly, I must say, out of all the research, it was earlier on going through information that we could find about the victims that was getting me
very emotional. It was there was one in particular
it just makes it
that actually
all that more real,
brought tears to my eyes. It was Errol Lindsay, when his sister, that quote from his sister, and there was a couple of other quotes that I didn't include, and just made me so emotional, and that the comment that was left on James Dockstader's Find a Grave just really made me emotional. I just thought it was a very thoughtful comment for someone to leave, especially someone who didn't seem to know him or know his family at all. It really kind of restored my faith in humanity a little bit after reading about Dahmer, to be honest. Yeah, so that's kind of all we have for this case today, guys.
And yeah, we kind of don't really want to say much more because we did want to end with the little kind of tributes
to the victims.
Because a lot of the time the victims aren't spoken enough
and
about.
They're kind of overlooked, and especially in a case like this one.
And
that
so obviously
many.
Isn't, always down to the people doing the podcast or to some journalists or anything like that. It's simply because a lot of the time the information isn't out there.
I will say it was quite difficult.
Yeah.
A lot of this information that I took was from those 2 articles that I sent to you.
Yeah, and I had to look through about 4 different websites to get what I got. And even at that, I only have a couple of sentences per person.
Yeah. But look, I do think it was a nice thing to do.
I think, it was important to include that because we were able to.
It's so important that these people are remembered for more than just being murder victims. It is important to remember they are people's loved ones.
They had lives,
they were
families.
fathers, they were brothers, they were sons, they were uncles, they were friends, acquaintances. So yeah, I think that's where we're going to leave it for today.
Yes.
As always, thank you for listening.
And yes, thank you for listening.
And
we will see you next week for another episode. It is Tanya's episode, so I can't say whether it's going to be...
It is going to be heartbreaking. It's an Irish case, that's all I'll tell you for now.
So prepare for that one as well.
As always, it's a heartbreaking case. And I'm pretty sure this one goes into a lot of... no, I'm going to keep it.
Yeah, we're going to leave it be. Yeah. So again, thanks very much for listening.
Stay safe out there.
And all the best.
Don't go home with Jeffrey Dahmer.
Yes.
Please.
Or anyone that gives that vibe. Mm-hmm. Stay safe. Okay, right. Lots of love out to all the victims, hopefully resting in peace, the family members that they're survived by, and I suppose to anyone who's been through anything.
Mm-hmm. Anyone who's lost someone they loved in any way.
In any way, but in this circumstance, especially from crime. And yeah, so all the love out to those of you who need it, or even those of you sitting at home at the moment that might not be feeling your best.
Good night and God bless.
Good night and God bless. All the best.